And Ryan, thank you very much. So I want to, it's a privilege for me to get on with you because, I look up to all the information that you dispense and they're always cutting edge. What I love about you and your organization is that innovation. Medicine is so old, and because I'm old, I can tell you it's real slow, but I'm happy to say that because of people like you, we can actually use our old school medicine, apply it to innovation, and we're much better off for it. So today I wanted to talk about, the aging, and then move into maybe, my own genetics for diabetes, and then, talk about why it's so difficult for people to lose weight, maybe.
Yeah, I'd be happy to discuss that. And I think we'll go over why you might not be as old as you think, right?
I don't feel it, so yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, I'd love to discuss those topics. And yeah, I think that's the goal, right? Is to stay as innovative as possible while still, maintaining those core principles of medicine and improving in everything we do for patients.
Yeah. I mean, so actually, my score, it wasn't just about the score, but, tell me a little about epigenetic age, and then I can go about what I found on my score.
Absolutely. So epigenetic age is still a relatively new concept. As you talked about innovation, it's still very new for anybody who's out there that isn't familiar with it. It really started in 2013 with some really cool algorithms. And initially, they were just really good at predicting age, right? Or getting close to your chronological age. But as these algorithms have gotten a little bit better, we're able to read markers on top of your DNA to really learn a lot more about health insights, particularly getting a metric called biological age, which is very important because age is the #1 risk factor for almost all chronic disease. And if you can manage that age, you can also manage your risk for those chronic diseases. And that's why you finally get that really good preventive medicine approach.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that we say in the conventional medical world. The one way to have premature death is get a disease. Yeah. And so by identifying disease or preventing it, that's the best way. And, what's always been a kind of an X factor is how do we know that our impact on controlling blood pressure or controlling sugar is actually not only controlling the disease, but maybe, slowing down the aging process?
Yeah, exactly. Now we have an objective way to actually tell that. I always tell people that, unfortunately, I think a lot of people think of health as a binary thing. I'm healthy or I'm sick. And what they don't realize is that there are varying degrees of sickness and varying degrees of healthiness as well. Disease doesn't go overnight. And now with this objective quantification method, we're able to break that down a little bit more and really give grading systems to how healthy you really are and how well you're going through the process of living your life.
Exactly. And you mentioned that it's at the DNA level, or at the surface of the DNA level. And then I want to give an example of how, oxidation, inflammation affects some other molecules. So it's never, like you said, a binary thing. It's like not domino, but so many things going on at the same time, but collectively they actually have more power. But at the end of the day, you want to know what the final result is. So yeah, if you just tell me about the epigenetic age there.
Yeah, definitely. And going back to that baseline, I think that I probably didn't do a great job explaining epigenetics for those who maybe aren't familiar. But epigenetics is sort of the stuff above the genetic sequence. So I always use a light bulb analogy, which may or may not be an effective one, but sort of looking at a light bulb, how it's constructed, how it's put together. That's sort of like reading your DNA sequence because you're seeing what's there. But what this epigenetic methylation stuff tells us is if that light bulb is on or off. And that's really the purpose of the light bulb, right? Same with our genes is, what genes are turned on and off are really important depending on what cell you're looking at. And so by looking at those methylation marks, which are really methylation happens on a gene to silence a gene, we're able to look at the activity of that gene. So it's a functional way of saying, we know what can happen. Now let's see what actually is happening. And so that epigenetics is those methylation marks are really what we are looking at in peripheral whole blood to really give us an idea of what that biological age metric is. And we're looking at a lot of DNA to do that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's appropriate about the light bulb. There's a lot of times where all the ingredients are there, but the light bulb's not on. And sometimes I wonder if some of the physicians' light bulbs are on. The ingredients are good. All the PhDs and MDs look good, but the light's not quite on. But anyway, enough with the sarcasm. And so the example that I wanted to make is that, when we are treating people's blood pressure through ACE inhibitors, we actually increase nitric oxide. When we are controlling people's homocysteine, we are actually indirectly making nitric oxide. Now, I know I want to talk a little scientific, and then we'll go basic for people, who are diverse. And then when we lower the sugar, we are actually indirectly increasing nitric oxide. So on one hand, yes, we're controlling the numbers. That's the basic way that doctors talk. But whether they realize it or not, they're actually impacting a molecule called nitric oxide. And that has very powerful impacts, because we know that controlling those things slow down the aging process. But now we can actually look at epigenetic components, the different loci potentially.
Exactly. Yeah. And all of these molecules, all these lifestyle factors, it's, as you mentioned, it's not like a domino effect. It's a complex system. And knowing those intricacies, as physicians like yourself do, are vastly important in managing those processes. And you can't look at anything individually without considering the whole picture.
Yeah. It's like exercise. It wasn't that long ago when people just used to say, exercise is good for you. But, I'm not sure there was that much science behind it. You used to hear rumors that the number of hours you spend in the gym is how much more longer you'll live. I don't know that's a fact, but now we know that if you over-exercise, you can actually create more oxidation, actually shorten your lifespan. I give examples of studies that I know are fairly old now, where marathon runners may have had more heart attacks than conventional people. So there's a fine line between not exercising at all, being sedentary, maybe over-exercising, and there is a sweet spot. And so there's the art of medicine, and the studies aren't the end all be all. You've got to kind of do a bit of both.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we'll get into some specific examples of particularly that, because, I think a lot of people also associate metabolic health with functional health. And a lot of times that might not be the case. As you mentioned, some of the best athletes in the world are overtraining, creating a lot of oxidative stress, and probably not doing the best things for the longevity of their body. And so we'll get to some examples of that as we go through some of the testing.
Yeah, well, one of the early conferences I used to go to, these were anti-aging conferences. There were endocrinologists up on the stage, so looking up at them, and they were very honest. So, one young guy, I think he's young, he was in his 30s at that time. This is almost a decade ago. And he was saying that, well, I turned out to be diabetic. It's like, well, what happens? And he's not the only one. There's another, well-known doctor, Dr. Attia, I believe. He, ended up getting insulin resistance and maybe mild version of diabetes. Again, these were people who actually maybe overtrained. So you want to give me a little insight from your angle about that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, so actually 2 studies came out today, which are incredibly relevant for our discussion. And actually one of them is called Body Composition and Physical Activity Associations with Epigenetic Age. And the other one is looking at essentially obesity, epigenetic clocks and obesity, and all those relationships. And so if we're talking from an epigenetic perspective, those are important considerations. And a lot of times, it's hard, the way that these scores are created, they're very, very well correlated to some of these health outcomes, which makes them so promising. But a lot of times the difference is we don't know which is sort of the dog and which is the tail, right? We don't know which is controlling which. And teasing out those mechanisms can be a little bit difficult. And so right now, one thing we know for sure is that obesity and insulin sensitivity are 100% correlated to advanced aging as detected by this epigenetic aging clock. But the process by which that happens, we're not sure if obesity causes the advanced aging, or if the advanced aging causes you a propensity to develop obesity. But we do know that they're connected.
Yeah, this is where the clinician comes in. Again, we don't know it all, but we've got a few moving parts, but we're actually getting direct contact with the patients. And the truth is, it goes bi-directionally because some people are a little prone to the obesity. But to keep it simple, I try to explain it in this terms, that you could have 2 people with the same body composition, or BMI, should we say. One has an environment that is, for a better word, a little more toxic, or maybe a little bit more inflammatory. And the other one is a little cleaner because he eats clean, but the BMI might be the same. One actually doesn't have enough adiponectin, and the other one has good production of adiponectin, which is a marker that the adipose tissue is metabolically more active. And so there is a difference, and I'll lead you to a few more differences. So looks are deceptive is what I'm saying. So not all adiposity is the same. It just depends on what the inner workings behind that adiposity.
Definitely. And I think that we're even getting really close to epigenetic mechanisms to differentiate that, and also differentiate the ways to fix that. Because what we can see is that some people are able to lose weight and they're able to sustain that weight loss. Other people are not able to sustain that. And they might have different characteristics in their epigenetics, which predispose them to a likelihood of that. And what that is able to do is in the future, we're going to be able to say, these particular types of activities, these particular types of diet, nutrition, medications, all of these things that change those loci might reduce your risk of sort of gaining that weight back or doing some of those other types of interventions. And so it really, I would say, highlights the power of giving the clinician these tools to be able to make the appropriate decisions to say, I would like to put you on this diet or this diet, or recommend more of this food or medication. And that's really where we're trying to go with this type of testing. Is epigenetics right now are very popular for their biological age capabilities, but in the future, they will help determine patient prognosis and treatment plans and a lot of other cool things, especially when you get to complex disease states like obesity and all the things that are involved.
Yeah, so I'm going to give another clinical example in a second, but if to keep it simple, if we say, what are, say, the top 5 things to slow down the aging process, or the opposite, accelerate aging, what would you say those top 5 things were?
Yeah, so the data tends to suggest that the things that would advance stress is exposure to chemicals, exposure to stress, and that doesn't just mean emotional stress, but also physical stress, as we mentioned, high levels of physical stress, and then sort of these disease processes, things like senescence or metabolic dysfunction. Those types of things lead to downstream pathways which cause these diseases to be more likely to develop, and then that accelerates the aging process in sort of a positive feedback loop. And so I would say that those are some of the biggest things we've seen correlated. And then lastly and not least, smoking. Smoking is one of the biggest epigenetic drivers of change in a non-positive way, and it's greatly associated with mortality, if you didn't know that already.
Yeah, I mean, so what do you think it is about? I mean, let's say it's nicotine smoking. There's lots of different types of smoking. You're younger, you might know all those types, but I'm a little older, a little conservative. I may not be trying those things. No, but so what do you think it is about smoking that creates that environment?
Yeah, it's hard to say. We don't see in the data, it doesn't suggest that nicotine is the driving factor, but it seems to be some of the other, there's just chemical irritants and pollutants, and that induces some type of epigenetic change, which are actually very well correlated to death.
Yeah, which is exactly what you said, is that those chemicals. So I think my top 5 is very similar to what yours is, but it's more simple. You're a PhD level answer. So it's that those chemicals that they put in the cigarette with combustion that may create oxidation. Again, I don't know if you agree with that, but clearly smoking does cause more problems with cardiovascular risk. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
And on the reverse side, I think that's where we get to have fun, right? That's where we get to think, how do we compete with ourselves to handle the aging process as best we can with our own biochemical individuality? And I think that the things that are exciting there are first off, things that handle those big hallmarks of aging. For most people, there are 9 hallmarks of aging out there. I think that some of the ones that are probably the most closely related to these measures of epigenetic age are going to be things like telomere length, reducing senescence, helping with nutrient sensing, doing things like fasting, things that would also help some of our processes of maintenance of DNA, like increasing NAD or activating sirtuins. Those are some of the big things that we're seeing make a difference, and then anything that affects the immune system in a positive way as well.
Yeah. That's high level, so I'm going to break it down. So, being a simple guy, the 5 things I tell people, and in this order, after many, many years, this order hasn't changed for me. If anything, it's been solidified by science, which is don't damage your sleep. The reason I say that is because people choose not to sleep. Yeah, they get away with it when they're younger, they got children, they want to stay up and enjoy a little bit more. And that is the beginning of the demise. They just don't realize it because they don't feel it. And then we'll explain the science in a minute. The next one is, like you said, chemicals, but what did you put in? Don't put in bad stuff. Whether it's the preservatives or additives, you just don't know how these disrupt this amazing human body. And disruption is part of, it's analogous to not what you do, is how you kind of a whole back. So we'll talk about senescence in a minute. And
Yeah.
then the third one is you got to put the right stuff in, because if you don't, what's the building block for your body? How do you expect your body to work right if you don't nourish the body? And then you may have to add things, because over time, in the beginning we knew B12 was low. Now we know vitamin D is low. If you're following the standard of care, there's so many things that are low. And oftentimes, on social media, which you're on and I'm on, people often make statements. They don't realize that we test. So when we say things like lower magnesium or lower D or lower glutamine, it's not that we just read it or we just heard it. We actually test. And after hundreds of patients, you figure out the pattern, right? And the fifth pillar actually for me is that, sometimes when you have this environment, like you're a smoker, you're creating oxidation, or I just measured your advanced cardiac test and I see oxidized LDL. I have to come up with an antioxidant because there's no prescription as of yet to reduce oxidation. So we've got to come up with our own sort of evidence-based way to do that. So that's the simplistic answer of the 5 things for aging there.
But that's a beautiful answer, because what it is, it's practical interventions which make a difference in patients' lives. And that's where, I think that right now there's definitely a gap between this epigenetic knowledge, which is so robust, and actually applying it to clinic. And that is definitely what our goal is to, again, provide that information so you can make the relevant clinical decisions. And that is what the patient wants to hear. They want to hear, what can I go home and do and make a difference in my life, and then actually see that reflected in their biological age in 6 months or a year. Whenever they retest, they'll say, yeah, those interventions were exactly what I needed to make a difference.
Yeah. So you look, I think you and I would agree, and then let's see if we can try to simplify it, is that, sometimes our indulgence is what's creating the problem. And the opposite, the restriction, and we can talk about intermittent fasting in a minute, is actually the breaks in a way. And when you mentioned about sirtuins, when we have a certain lifestyle, these sirtuins are able to clean up the DNA, right? Dr. Sinclair described it really good. Deacetylation, I probably said it incorrectly, is now pruning the damage of the DNA. And the way I describe it is like, if you let the roses keep growing, the bush gets bushier and bushier. And, sometimes when you prune it down heavily, it looks like you've destroyed the plant, but it becomes much stronger. So, what you just said at a high level about sirtuins, actually, people don't have to understand it. They just need to know that by doing too much, giving yourself 5 meals a day, 6 meals a day, you're activating a growth pathway. And sometimes doing less of it may actually help you clean things up, whether you understand it as autophagy. Maybe you can explain that a little bit more.
No, I think that's a great analogy. I think that one of the analogies also that Dr. Sinclair uses in his book is talking a little bit about, using a National Guard as a reference, right? He talks about, you have someone there in the National Guard that in their local community can handle the local community, but if they get getting pulled away for other types of insults and are not able to be at home and be in their natural community, it can deteriorate because they're not there keeping control of that. And that's similar to what happens with a lot of those other enzymes and things in our body, is that due to insults or to overconsumption, they get distracted from their natural job and what they're best at doing. And then that deteriorates over time. And that's really what aging is that progressive loss of sort of that function over time. And if we can reduce the pulling them away, we sort of optimize them to do their job, then they can actually do it, and our bodies can stay healthier for longer.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we talked about aging there, but I'd love to. Hopefully, we can try and do this on a regular basis. You're a busy guy, so I've got to find a kind of a regularity that might work, because I can't imagine you having the time to go live with me that often. But I'd love to continue this on a regular basis. But just changing pace a little bit. We talked about how to activate sirtuins, and one of the reasons we may need to do it, because we're sometimes feeding ourselves 3 main meals. I'm sure you and I don't do that, and then snacks in between. We're now stimulating insulin to be released, and that then turns on certain growth factors. And there's a time for growth factor when you're probably on the younger side. And certainly on the extreme side, when you're a little older, you may need a little turning on of the growth stuff to just hold on to functionality. But there is a point in the middle, and that's arguable. And as a clinician, I would say the part that I would be super careful about is between 50 and 65, and where those growth pathways may actually also create more metabolic problems, more cardiovascular problems, maybe even cancer. I say maybe, that's a loaded word, cancer, right? and so, when you said that intermittent fasting can activate sirtuins, and sirtuins cleans up the DNA, that we're actually, explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I think that the intermittent fasting is interesting because I think I like your analogy of the rose bush now a little bit better, and I might convert to that one. But I think that whenever we are at a calorie restriction, our body turns up the survival pathways, and a lot of those survival pathways are maintenance and regulate things like energy and just keeping our bodies the way that we're supposed to do at that homeostatic set point. And so particularly whenever we are going, into these fasting states, we're increasing something called autophagy, which is sort of the way that our body cleans itself up. And that's the reason I love that rose metaphor so much, is because it is sort of like pruning a rose bush. It is, helping to make sure that the energy goes into those beautiful blooms instead of just growth. And really, I like that analogy well, because increasing that autophagy is one of the big hallmarks of sort of controlled growth process in health. And what we've seen as well from an epigenetic aging standpoint is that it absolutely fasting and particularly large durations of fasting, 48 to 72 hours, can also slow that rate of aging. And that is to sort of flourish and have those blooms. That's the best option.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of information. And again, it depends on who you're dealing with. You're dealing with the person with the cancer, you're dealing with the athlete, are you dealing with the elderly? So there has to be a nuance between the answers. You can't give the same answer, but we're just talking about general information. But the thing about, the word intermittent is useful, because we're not saying day after day of deprivation, because even though we know that actually, constant caloric restriction does actually extend your life, does actually reduce disease. You just don't look so good. But this intermittent works really, really well, because not only have you just said correctly that it's like autophagy, where it cleans up the old cells, so it's kind of being youthful in a way, but that intermittent fasting activates the sirtuins, and that activates AMPK, which is a messenger for metabolism. So in the short term, you won't waste away. In the short term, you won't be depleted. Now, you may cry and moan that you're hungry and thirsty, and that's subjective. But scientifically, you actually release growth factors. You actually release amino acids like leucine. So short term, your body's ready to survive. And then when you feed yourself, you just don't want to feed yourself beef burgers and French fries. You just want to try to break it nicely with good food, right?
Exactly. And on that point, I think for anyone listening, if you are scared of that as a process, which is understandable, I think that people love to eat, and I get that. For those who the first time's always the worst, and then it gets a little bit easier over time. Your body adapts, you get less of some of those other side effects like irritability, and it becomes a little bit easier. And so if you think of it as a way to incorporate into your lifestyle, it can be manageable and really, really proactive way to approach your health.
I think the misconception, I believe, I could be wrong, is that they think there's just one way to do it. It's got to be 16 hours, got to be 18 hours, got to be 20 hours. It has to be, you got to skip your breakfast. No, it's just you choose what's right for you. Are you a breakfast person? Are you a lunch person? Are you a dinner person? And then try to, like you said, get into it a little bit. And actually the easy part is you don't have to think about what am I going to have for, pack for lunch or whatever, things like that, Or exactly. Have downtime to go to, well, you can't go to restaurants, they're all shut down now.
Exactly. But yeah, there are ways to stick your toe in, so to speak, and to make it a lifestyle process that's sustainable, right? The last thing you ever want to do is do something once and then throw it out, right? You want to go slow and steady and make a difference.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to share a personal story. I mean, what happened in my 30s is, as a clinician, you're busy, your practice is getting bigger, you're getting children, you've got a house, you're doing on-calls, things like that. Towards the end of my 30s and beginning of the 40s, my body was starting to feel a little weird. And, once I was at a kind of a holistic practitioner's office for my wife, I was just waiting, and the light was coming in through the window, hit the mirror, and I was looking at myself thinking, oh my God, this is looking bad. And that was like 42, which is about a decade ago. And I'm thinking, and that's just an accumulation of a decade of just working hard and stress. But I didn't think about it. I just thought, it's okay. That's what we do, right? We're a doctor. We're supposed to be on call. Just let me sleep one night. And I think that it was all taking a toll. And as I started to make some of those changes, like even though I ate well and I wasn't really particularly overweight, I said, you know what? I've got to do more because my body's not feeling right. To long story short, I think that as I progressed into making more changes to eat clean, go to sleep on time, be a little bit more moderate. What's the story? You go to bed late, you're tired, you wake up at early, you go to the gym, and then you rush to your work. That's what I used to do. I said, you know what, that can't be good for me. First I got to go to sleep. If my body's not right, I can't go and stress myself. And I think we need to come back to the word stress. It's not intermittent fasting, it's actually intermittent stressing. And so fasting is a way to stress, so we should talk about that. But anyway, the long story short, the final step is in the last maybe 3 to 5 years, I've gone more into the caloric restriction, although I'm not that great. I wasn't. I still eat a lot when I eat a lot, but then more into this into time feeding, I should really say. And I think it makes a huge difference, because then when you look at it, it's like, you know what? It's not for vanity's sake. It's like, I want to know, does it look like I've got oxidation? Does it look like I have inflammation? Because, I actually had both of those things at different points in time. And because I have the luxury of doing the testing, I can actually feel it when I'm working out, and then I'm testing it and I can see the results. And conversely, when you change those, rectify them, and then you see the rewards, right? Based on my epigenetic age. Maybe we can talk about intermittent stressing, really, if you want.
Yeah, I love that term for it too. It's probably the first time I've heard that, but I think that it's well put, because it's not just the caloric restriction that can also make a difference or show longevity. Things like stressing your body to colder temperatures, right? Activating those heat shock proteins. That's a similar type of stress, which has, again, a longevity benefit. So I think the stress sort of intermittent stress is definitely a good word for it. And again, what's happening there is you're just giving signals to your body, right? You're just signaling your body to be a little bit more active and to stay on its toes, so that your body is facilitating those biochemical pathways, which are encouraging all the things we want: better metabolism, and then more stem cell sort of response, and all that leads to those things you see in the mirror whenever the light hits you a certain way. You say, "Oh wait, that looks different. I look better," and it makes a big difference. So I think that intermittent stress is definitely a good word for it.
Yeah. Well, so this is to keep it simple for people who think doctors are super smart. They're not. The body is super smart. The more you discover, it's like there's so much capability, but have we discovered it? So when they talk about biohacking, I have a better word. It's called discovery, right? Have you unlocked the secret? Secret is always there. We just didn't know it. So this biohacking, that's the kind of young man's terminology. I don't like it. But anyway, I use it just for the sake of it, people are familiar. But it's really unlocking the body's capability. So in Finland, if I'm not Finland or Sweden, I think it was Finland, because they get snow much worse than the Northeast here. So they did the study with the saunas, a regular sauna, temperature above over 170. And what they found, and we're going to talk about heat shock proteins in a minute, is that the people that use the sauna more than 4 days a week had about 45% reduction in cardiac disease. People who use the sauna 1 to 3 times a week had about almost like 30% decrease in cardiac disease. And the people that used it 1 or less didn't get any. So this is really a little sort of relief for people think, oh my God, I don't want to fast. Oh my God, I don't want to exercise. Well, you know what? The sauna is an intermittent stress and actually reduces cardiac disease in probably the mechanism that you just described, that it creates heat shock proteins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And that maintenance, those proteins' ability to regulate those body functions and make sure that the right things are happening at the right time and the wrong things are being managed appropriately. I mean, that's the way to go. And for those, and I think that's a good point as well, is that if the fasting isn't for you, think about those heat shock proteins. Think about some other ways. Another way that is interesting is limiting methionine, right? An amino acid from the diet has been shown to correlate with longevity. So avoiding things like eggs and some of those other nutrients. There are definitely ways, as you mentioned, to unlock the potential in different ways. You don't necessarily have to commit to all of them, but definitely adding a couple that are easy to add to your lifestyle can make a big difference.
Right. And well, I just learned the methionine thing from you, so I'm going to save that for another day and steal your idea and run with that. But that may be a little bit over people's heads. What I say about, I've got to say it now. You talked about eggs. I got to talk about eggs. There's probably a right time for the eggs, and there's a time where you got to be a little bit more cautious about it. And there's another time where you actually need to do it. So eggs are good, but it just depends. Like for the reasons you just got great choline, it's a great essential fat if they're reared in the right way. But like you just said, there's a lot of methionine in there. You don't want that pathway activated maybe at some times.
Yeah, absolutely. I think and I think that with all of these things, I think that everything in moderation, right? Everything has its time and place, and you don't need to also, as we're saying, maybe commit to 1 or 2. Don't go 100% all at once. Don't eat. I'm not saying don't eat for a week. That's not what I'm saying. But I think that having someone to help guide you in that care and having objective biomarkers to look at and make sure that you're having the positive effect is helpful.
Yeah. And seriously, just to finish on the heat, which is I believe a temporary stress. And again, the body was created to be resilient, to survive, to go through this evolution, whether you believe in, this argument with evolution and all that stuff. There's no argument. Just let's go for the science. With science, there's no need to argue. It's just a fact. Hopefully, it's a fact.
Exactly.
But with the heat shock protein, what people don't realize is that it's that three-dimensional structure of the protein. They think protein is just to build muscle. They think protein is just that whey protein. And it may be, I don't know, but it has no function unless it's three-dimensional. So just to give people an idea, when we have muscle contraction, it's sliding proteins over each other that give that muscle contraction. That's a three-dimensional structure. A more complicated three-dimensional structure is the mitochondria, where you have the ATPase. So that enzyme is actually three-dimensional. Now, the person who knew about mitochondria maybe 50 years ago, who couldn't imagine there's a three-dimensional structure because there was no visible way to identify it, right? Isn't it amazing when you can actually visualize this three-dimensional structure? So proteins are actually three-dimensional structures with actions, whether it's a hormonal action, a muscle action, a receptor action. It could be a tail, it could be a sliding, it could be a rotatory system. Now, when you have a bad lifestyle, like you don't sleep, you don't exercise, you eat junk food, you got chemicals, you create oxidation, inflammation, you're damaging these three-dimensional structures, so they lose their three-dimensional structure and they just sit around and do nothing. The idea of the heat shock protein is that you have these ES proteins, which then capture these misfolded proteins, put a lid on it, using energy, they recoil it, and then they throw it back out as a three-dimensional structure. So, there was a doctor dealing ophthalmologist, actually, you may know of him. I think he did a presentation where for neurodegenerative, that means that there's a buildup of, worn out nerves, but they're not gone. They're dysfunctional, but they're just sitting around. So ALS is one of those. It's a very progressive, very dangerous, and a terminal condition where you got this buildup of degenerated nerves, which means they're not functional. They're sitting around. They're crowding out the normal neurological function, so those stop, growing or regenerating. And so what this doctor was able to do was create a heat gradient in the brain and reverse ALS. There's probably other ways, here, there, and around the world. But this is fascinating that if we understand, how to unlock the body's capability using simple things like thermo energy,
Yeah, and in such a drastic case like that too, ALS is such a drastic example of a disease, and if you can make a difference in there with a simple thought process on regulating heat shock protein, it goes to show you some of the power they can have. And I think that's another thing as we talk about aging and maintenance of these certain processes is that these things make a big difference, especially if you adhere to them over long periods of time. And they sort of have additive synergistic effects because you're encouraging maintenance in a lifestyle rather than trying to have one intervention.
So I'm just going to change pace a little bit. I think that people have to have imagination. So you're a little bit young, but you've seen the Star Trek, and those recent movies were pretty damn good. But I'm of the era of Shatner. I think that's his name, right? Robert Shatner. That's the original guy. And how they used to have the flip. It wasn't a phone, right? There's a flip. There's a teleport. So medicine is like that. You have to have imagination. Someone had the imagination they're going to go to space or the moon, right? I think doctors don't have imagination. What they do is they rely on somebody else, and that's a problem. Because we're the ones seeing the patient. We've got to have the imagination of what can we expect. And then we've got to go out to smart people like you and say, what do you have in your toolbox? Give me a bit of that. Let me play with this, right? That's what they say, we practice medicine because we're not good at it. We've got to practice. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Definitely.
But so changing pace, what I was trying to say is that, first you have to have imagination. Then you got to go and look for the latest information and certain technologies. And then you got to put it together. Unless you want to do what every other doctor does, which is safe, it's called evidence-based medicine, and you're good because the lawyer won't chase you because you're doing what everybody does. But if you do what everybody else does, you can't expect a better result.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, yeah, and one of the ways to do that is to know more about what you're doing and getting those types of diagnostic information to give you a little bit more feedback to make the relevant decisions. But beyond that, I think that, definitely, probably if most of the listeners here didn't already know I was a nerd, very familiar with the Star Trek analogy. And I think that,
Oh, yeah.
I think that that's it, they're sort of based on and predicated on exploring. And that is exactly what leads to advances in medicine.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that, going back to Star Trek or things like that, or those sort of space programs, well, it's one of these days we're going to be able to get a body through a scanner where it does the diagnostics and you come out of it a new person. Now, I mean, I don't know when that's going to happen, but mark my word, it's going to happen. First, you have to imagine it, someone's going to do it. But in the meantime, what we have to do is, like, we have 3 or 4 modalities. And the best that we're going to do is understand that they're very good modalities, but the smart doctor knows which order to put them in. That's kind of what we can do today. But tomorrow, they're going to be able to do all 3 or 4 things just like that through that machine in a period of time. But for now, we just got to say, okay, let me prime this area, then let me nourish it, then let me regenerate it, then it will repair. You got to do it in the right order. And I don't think doctors understand that, because they're looking at the disease model. They're going by protocols. They come in for a visit for blood pressure, and that's it. They come in for a visit for blood sugar, and that's it. And that's not how the body works.
Exactly. And not to derail the conversation too much, I think, but that is also, I think, the beauty of this type of personalized medicine testing is because, there's always been the classic, example in one size fits all care of medicine where, there are a couple million people in Manhattan, but if you went ahead and dropped size 7 shoes, the average shoe size in Manhattan, there's a lot of people who are unhappy. And it's the same thing with medical care. Having a personalized approach that tells you more about the individual and having a sort of that tailored to their body is helpful. And that's one of the other things about the epigenetic testing is that you no longer have to have those 40-year placebo-controlled trials just to see how it's affecting the population. What you can really do is see how one drug or one intervention is affecting you as an individual and how it's affecting some of those long-term effects.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, your epigenetic age, the bio age, is the new frontier. And what I was using, and you were familiar with, telomeres. And what we, even the people who discovered telomeres said, look, when you have higher antioxidant function, when you have a cleaner liver, a detox liver, you will be able to slow down you'd be able to stop the telomere from becoming shorter. In other words, slowing down the biological age. And that principle actually works, because when we were using it, we would optimize antioxidant function, optimize liver function, detoxification function, and we would see the slowing down and the reversal of the telomere length over that time.
Absolutely. And that's, as I mentioned, one of the hallmarks of aging, right? And would have been a biomarker for aging for a long time. And actually, soon we'll actually be reporting out telomere length on our tests. So in addition to the biological age, you'll also get your telomere length, which is actually strangely highly correlated to things like cardiovascular outcomes. So it is, again, a piece of that puzzle. But as we start to get further into these other aging-related biomarkers, we get more useful information that helps guide that clinical treatment.
Yeah, I think what we're saying here is objectivity. All these people who have questions and being skeptical, that's good. That's what we are. We do the same thing. There's no bigger skeptic than yourself. Yeah. They don't realize that we're more skeptical about things than they realize. And the fact is that when you're doing something that's different to other people, it is going to look strange. But we're not doing this at the whim. We're looking at the lead scientists with the lead information, and we follow very safe standards. That's another thing that comes up over and over. And the reason why I think we do well is that we're always super cautious and we follow the standards. And that's why there's not that risk. You follow the standards, monitor properly. And so there's not a risk when you do that.
Absolutely. I think that, the only thing worse than no information is bad information. And so basing any decisions off information that isn't true is tough to make good decisions that way. So that's one of the things about, especially this type of testing. It's so accurate and so precise that you're able to get really useful information. And most of these studies are done in really large scales to eliminate any type of error and to be very, very precise. And then it comes down to a mathematical argument, which then can yield clinical level population results.
Yeah. So I think, to keep it simple, this kind of testing, what we started off by saying is about, biological aging, but what they're looking at is methylation. And they're now looking at or breaking it down to different points on the DNA. They call them loci. And so specifically, you released the one about the diabetes. There were two points, and those would indicate whether the signals were being expressed for diabetes or not, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at two particular spots. So just like genetics, we look at particular SNPs, right? Different locations in each genome, which might be similar to control certain proteins. There are some really, really good markers for diabetes risk. Actually, we talk a lot about the standard of care in evidence-based medicine, and some of these epigenetic markers are much better than sort of the standard care of medicine for detecting pre-diabetes, with some detection being up to 7 years earlier of those pre-diabetic conditions, and much better than fasting insulin and A1C levels. The two levels we look at are a gene called ABCG1, which is has to do with energy homeostasis and cholesterol and lipid transport, and the other one we look at is called phospho-1, and that's based in skeletal muscle, and can be a hypomethylated. And really, if those two are hypomethylated, it can increase your risk of type 2 diabetes by over 10%. And so we're able to look at really, really early in the process to make sure that we can make intervention changes before it actually becomes a disease. And that's really the beauty of it, is that it's really, really sensitive.
Yeah, and that's where we can use current standards. So, for myself, because I'm older now, and both my parents are diabetic, I've always been kind of in tune with, well, I got to work out, I got to eat right. But I've always lived with a high fasting sugar, almost like 99, 101, even in my 30s, now almost 52. So my hemoglobin A1C over the last decade had been 5.6. And as you and I know, that's right in the upper limit of normal, but it's still normal. And so it may be because of my genetics or whatever. But the fact is that, as I've got older and I've realized that, what everybody else does is not good enough for me, I've got to get better and better and better. What's happening is that my hemoglobin A1C is actually going down. It's going down to 5.4. At times been 5.2. So this is ironic, because as you and I know, that as you get older, type 2 diabetes becomes more prevalent. But how is it possible that as I get older, it's coming down? It's because I've realized my genetics, and I'm having to act upon what my genetics. So I'm controlling the epigenetic expression. And so when we looked at my loci, those are definitely in the range where I haven't expressed or low likelihood of expressing diabetes. It's because I've made the changes that I've had to do, because I've just not been as fortunate as the average person.
Yeah, well, and it also, it goes to speak to the length of what that testing has told you, right? It's giving you that feedback to make the right decisions, which is sort of the beauty of that testing, right? You did it, to see if you were healthy, and it might have been borderline, but you realized the interventions, and hopefully that's what this is doing as well. And and we're based on your test again. You're reducing your risk by almost around 20% when you look at the combination effect of both of those genetic loci, which is a big change in risk for one of the most popular diseases in the world.
And it goes back to circle back to what we were talking about sirtuins. But what we said was that when you have multiple meals, your body's going to release a little bit more insulin. When it releases a little bit more insulin, you get into a hyperinsulin state, which is not good if you've got genetics for diabetes. And so basically what we're correlating is the fact that, well, I've reduced the number of meals in a day, so my insulin doesn't surge. It's easier to lose weight. And by the way, my hemoglobin A1C went down. Oh, and look, the epigenetics shows a positive correlation. It's all about correlation, by the way, right? It's not like it's a calculation, it's a correlation.
Exactly. That's sort of what I was referencing with the obesity versus, what comes first, the obesity or the accelerated aging. It's, all these things that we're doing are correlations, but they're still valuable information because they're so predictive to outcomes. And that's really important, but definitely based on correlation, not causation.
Yeah. Well, I've taken up a lot of your time. I really enjoyed our conversation. I really want to do this more, so I'm going to bug you. We're going to do this some more. But future topics could be on simple things that people do when they work out and what they eat, and it doesn't always have to be at the science level. But what we try to do is get the best science and try to help people create a kind of a lifestyle, a normal lifestyle. We don't want them being starving themselves. We don't want them being stressed out all the time. They can actually, get information and get some tools and figure out what's right for them and make good choices. I think you mentioned that.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where it gets fun too, is seeing what works for you, and making a lifestyle that's both knowledgeable about your choices, but also consistent in application. And I think that there are some easy recommendations we could always make to help us delay the process. And I would always love to come back and talk a little bit more.
Yeah, but in closing, I think for people, you know, who are going to observe this, I want to give them a few tools, and this is basically something that's come from objective scientific look. You know, the worst way to make yourself get older faster is go damage your sleep. The next one is put bad stuff into your body. The next one is don't put good stuff in. So it's really that simple. And but I'd like people to think about it. I'd like to be able to give them something that they can take away, some information. And so the information I want to take away is that of the people with sleep apnea, which is a disorder, and we know that's a very defined condition, 100% of those people have low testosterone. And the fact is that testosterone is not only for virulence, it's actually for bone health, for muscle mass or body composition, for cognition, immune function, and much, much more, insulin sensitivity. So
Absolutely.
the fact is that disrupting your sleep is one of those evidence-based things we know will not only be the beginning of disease, but actually make you age faster. So if they learn one thing, if they watch us today, is, you know, don't damage your sleep.
Exactly. Yeah. And I love the way you put it too. I like the damage your sleep versus, you know, other ways to frame that as not getting enough. I think that it is a choice, and you should prioritize it.
Yeah. Oh, maybe we can talk about sleep. The next one. I mean, sleep is amazing, and maybe we'll leave for the next one, because, you know, there's studies where people are in the MRI with electrodes and they see the healthy sleep patterns versus the unhealthy. And so I just think it's such a simple thing that's so overlooked. And obviously I'm looking at myself in the mirror because doctors are the worst ones for that, right? And hence why in the late 30s, the body's breaking down. And most doctors just don't understand. They just keep going. And unfortunately, you know, if a doctor is the one that's supposed to be promoting health and he himself is not healthy, it's not a good look, right? And
Exactly.
anyway, let me not be negative on the finishing note. The point I'm trying to make is, you know, get your beauty sleep, because that's what it's supposed to be, right?
Exactly.
That's probably one of my problems when I was younger. Just didn't get enough beauty sleep. That's a problem. But I really appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, no, it's always a pleasure to touch base. And I mean, I think we could have gone for a lot of interventions over a lot of topics, and hopefully we'll cover some next time.
We will. And the thing is, for people who think that we're changing subjects and talking about a lot of things, that's how the body works. So for those people, just stay patient, because you'll figure it out. The body doesn't work in one dimension. We can't just talk about one thing only. You've got to bring in all these other moving parts to some degree. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Again, thank you very much, my friend.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Habib, and we'll talk soon. Thank you so much.
We'll do it again. Take care. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.